Annihilation is 2018's first divisive film despite it underperforming in the box office on its opening weekend. Like the director Alex Garland's previous film Ex Machina, it explores philosophical themes regarding humanity, morality, identity, nature, and evolution in a visually stunning way. In my spoiler-free review, which you can find at the end link of this video, I described Annihilation as ambiguous in the sense that there are a lot of gray areas regarding the deeper aspects and themes of the film. But I've come to find out that there are actually a lot of people who have been saying the opposite of that, saying that this film explains and spoon-feeds everything to the audience without allowing them to figure it out for themselves. Of course, I highly disagree with that. I'll agree that the film can, yes, sometimes get exposition heavy in terms of explaining how the shimmer ultimately operates and whatnot, but the film leaves other more substantive aspects up to visual and verbal inferences, like what pushed both Kane and Lina to voluntarily go into the shimmer, what caused both Lina and Kane to survive further than the rest of their crew, why did the extraterrestrial absorb human DNA and create duplicates, what did the extraterrestrial want? Some of these things might be a little bit more obvious than others, but these are some of the things that I believe the film demanded you to more or less think critically about. These are some loaded questions, so I will probably naturally end up answering other questions that you may have regarding the film as I'm trying to answer them. Let's just begin with discussing Natalie Portman's character Lina. She served in the army for 7 years and became a professor in biology, specifically in cellular life cycles and reproduction. So later we see Lina mourning over her husband Kane, so we assume that he must have died in the line of duty somewhere. The film seems pretty simple to follow at this point, but the film throws you its first curveball when we see a confused, depressed, disoriented version of her husband show up at her house. In the third act of the film, it's revealed that this is a duplicate version of her husband created by the extraterrestrial being that lives in the heart of the shimmer. And one neat thing to point out is that the film visually hints at this when the camera focuses on their hands through the glass of water on the table. It's conveying a scrambled, refracted image of their hands, which is precisely what the shimmer does. It refracts and scrambles all the DNA that dwells inside it. The film also contains multiple different shots of the glass of water throughout the film as well. I just thought that'd be a neat thing to point out. But okay, so eventually the duplicated alien version of Kane starts to puke up blood and experience massive organ failure. And this is what bridges Lina to the military center where Jennifer Jason Leigh's character reveals information about Kane's mission and the possible apocalyptic crisis brought on by the massive shimmer that continues to spread and consume everything in its path. So before I dive into all that, I want to stay on track with Natalie Portman's character Lina. One reoccurring critique of the film that I've seen from other movie critics, including bigger YouTubers like Chris Stuckman, is that the backstory involving Lina having an affair was a forceful and unnecessary attempt at giving more depth to Portman's character. But I honestly think it's a vastly important detail for the story, theme, and characters. So in terms of theme, Lina's infidelity relates back to the conversation she had with Jennifer's character regarding the human tendency to self-destruct. She talks about how we all have a natural, unstoppable yearning to self-destruct when things become too nice and orderly. So Lina's infidelity is her current self-destruction that she feels incredibly remorseful for. And we also come to learn that her husband literally self-destructs himself with a flash grenade, and we also learn that Lina destructs the alien duplicate of herself, which technically is another literal form of self-destruction. I just think it's creatively interesting that this film was able to convey self-destruction both literally and metaphorically. But okay, so the affair contributes to the theme of self-destruction, but it also adds more substance to the story and characters. The scene where we see a flashback of Kane by Lina's bedside before he goes on the mission was supposed to convey Kane's awareness of Lina's affair. He mentions that they made him leave a day early despite him having plans for the day. He has a very cold stare as he's talking to her and says that he does love her. But as he tries to kiss him, he turns his cheek and leaves. This is an incredibly strong indicator that he knows about her affair. He probably didn't really have to leave a day early, but once he found out about her affair, he just said screw the plans and he just went ahead and straight into the shit. And Lina is aware of this because in the later flashback where we see her in the act of cheating, she treats the professor harshly and admits that she believes Kane knows everything. The professor says she hates herself more than she hates him, which is at least partially true. She responds with, "No, it's you too," and kicks him out and ultimately puts an end to the affair. The notion of her hating herself will be useful later in this analysis. So when she learns that the alien Kane, who she thinks is the real Kane, went into the shimmer and is now on death row, she feels that she has a moral obligation to go into the shimmer due to her self-destructive infidelity that may or may not have pushed him to also go into the shimmer and risk his life. So another aspect of this film that some people might have questions about is what exactly determined each character's survival time. It's clear in the film that some people were being consumed by the shimmer faster than others. Why is that? I've discussed this subject with different people, and what ended up making more sense to me is that it has to do with one's mentality and mental state. It seems to me that those who were more frightened of death and held a possible hope that they might come back out of the shimmer were the ones that got consumed by the shimmer quicker. The one that started getting consumed by the shimmer first was Thorson's character. It's revealed that she's newly sober and had a dark past with drug addiction. Most people get addicted to drugs because they are being used as a stress reliever that helps them cope with the harsh realities of their life. So by definition, she is not someone who is used to handling stressful situations in a constructive way. She is not someone who has honestly accepted and embraced the harsh realities of life. So naturally, she's going to be the first to be consumed by the shimmer due to her weak mental state. Lina and Dr. Ventress were the two characters that lasted the longest because they were fully mentally prepared for what they rightfully assumed to be inevitable death. Dr. Ventress had cancer and was already on death row, so naturally death is not going to phase her while exploring the shimmer. Shepard shared a similar mentality, but she just happened to unfortunately be mauled and eaten by a mutated bear. It's crazy how nature do that. Josie is kind of the opposite. It's mentioned that she cuts herself, but not with intended suicide in mind. She does it to feel more alive, so I don't think it's much of a stretch to say that her life may have been a little too sheltered, and she needed to add a little pain in order to fill in that void. And I believe that she had the same intention going into the shimmer, but she got more than what she bargained for, to say the least. Plus, she was by far the youngest of them all and probably hasn't come to terms with death due to her age and inexperience. So let's talk about Lina. I have heard other channels like What the Flick state that Lina was actually expecting to come back, and I don't understand why they think that is. To me, Lina was definitely not expecting to return and was definitely mentally preparing herself for death. Here's what Lina knew before going into the shimmer. She knew that her husband Kane was experiencing organ failure and was on death row. She also knew that people have been going into the shimmer for 3 years and nobody has come out alive, and the only one who has come back is basically a vegetable waiting to die. She also has gigantic remorse for cheating on her husband and felt responsible for her husband's soon-to-be death. The film also demonstrates her character as a very down-to-earth person who has a naturalistic view on life. So with all of this context put into consideration, I think it makes more sense to say that she was not really expecting to return from the shimmer. She didn't enter the shimmer with any real hope that she will be able to save her husband's life. She went into the shimmer for her own personal moral redemption and out of her own curiosity. Her husband Kane went into the shimmer after experiencing intense heartbreak, knowing that the love of his life had been cheating on him throughout their marriage. So one can assume that Kane went into the shimmer with a fairly pessimistic outlook and was probably not all that afraid of death, which is most likely why he was able to survive the longest amongst his crew. One thing to note though is that Kane doesn't hate himself in the same way that Lina does. This will be useful soon. Okay, now it's time to get into what the hell was going on in the third act. So eventually, Lina makes it into the lighthouse where the source of the shimmer lies, and she discovers a videotape of Kane committing suicide through self-destruction with a flash grenade as he's talking to his alien duplicate about his current identity struggle and mental state. She wanders into the dark hole where the crater crash landed and finds Dr. Ventress, who we can assume is a duplicate due to her face being blurred as she's speaking. She mentions that she's not sure what it wants or if it wants, and then the alien duplicate begins to purge itself out of Ventress's body, and the alien begins to seduce Lina closer to it through its hypnotic sound and imagery. And by the way, the visuals, score, and sound effects from this point on is absolutely mesmerizing. It really does an incredible job at sucking you into what the main character is experiencing. So the being is able to consume a drop of her blood and it forms a humanoid duplicate of her. Her alien duplicate begins to mimic her exact movements, which results in Lina getting knocked unconscious twice. On her third attempt at escaping, she tricks her alien duplicate by pretending to let it in close and holding its hand. And as their hands softly connect, you can see Lina's face appear on her duplicate. This to me is an indicator that in order for the duplicate to really embody you, you have to let it get emotionally close to you, kind of like a form of nurturement. This is significant because we have observed that Kane's duplicate appears to have embodied his appearance pretty well, which means that Kane voluntarily nurtured the being in order for it to appear that way. This is where the subject of hating yourself comes useful in my opinion. Kane thinks much more highly of himself than Lina does. He does not hate himself, which is probably why he couldn't bring himself to kill the duplicate. He allowed the duplicate to get so close that he lost his identity and couldn't figure out which one was the duplicate. So he ultimately chose to destroy his current consciousness because he didn't have what it takes to look at his own face and destroy it. Lina, on the other hand, had no problem looking at her duplicate straight in the face and tricking it by placing a grenade in its hand as she runs away for cover. This is again because she does not think highly of herself and does hate herself for being naturally self-destructive. So her duplicate is in flames as it stumbles around and sets the entire place on fire, which again is a huge literal representation of self-destruction. The entire shimmer turns into ashes, and it cuts to Lina being asked about what the being was, what was its biological composition, and what was its purpose. She relies, "I don't know," to most of it, but when asked about what it wants, she gives the same response as Ventress and says, "I don't think it wants anything." So here are the big questions. What was the being's purpose? Why does it duplicate? And why does it mimic? So as far as the being's purpose, this answer might be a little underwhelming for some people, but it doesn't have a purpose necessarily. The extraterrestrial landed on Earth out of pure chance, and if you're asking for what its purpose was, it's the same purpose that we all share, which is to survive. The extraterrestrial being represents the chaotic, random nature of the universe and nature itself. Everybody wants there to be some sort of objective meaning because it's comforting, but the truth is that there is none. All the alien wanted to do was to survive, and we as humans naturally want answers as to why it's destroying our people and ecosystems because we automatically consider anything that gets in the way of our well-being and survival as evil. And to me, this is why it duplicates people. It figures that if it wants to survive on this planet, all it has to do is make copies of what is already surviving and thriving. It's creating something new, but also the same at the same time. But why was it mimicking Lina's exact movements? Well, think of the duplicate as a new life form that has just been born. It's a brand new life form, or child if you will, that is copying the parents' movements. This is what every new form of complex life does. They mimic their parents' and nurturers' behavior in order to learn and survive. The entire concept of duplication and creating pairs can also go back to the subject demonstrated in the film about the reproduction and life cycles of cells. Life began with the duplication of a singular cell, so I believe that the film is drawing a parallel with that and the extraterrestrial being. One could also draw a parallel from the duplicate pairs and how it's analogous to relationships and couples. Life cannot continue to thrive if it's on its own. If it wants its survival time to increase and live on, there must be a pair in order for that to happen. But okay, let's move on to some bonus questions. Why did Kane get better after the shimmer crumbled into ashes? Was the Lina shown at the end of the film the original Lina that went into the shimmer? And what the hell is up with Lina's tattoo of a snake eating its own tail? Well, to answer the first question, to be honest, I really don't know for sure. But after giving it lots of thought, what made the most sense to me is that perhaps after the extraterrestrial was destroyed, the alien DNA inside of Kane's body stopped dividing and mutating, which is probably why he was experiencing organ failure. But once the source of the alien died, the alien DNA was able to relax and stop mutating the body and causing chaos that is disrupting his bodily functions. I don't know if this is accurate, but it's a good discussion piece for the comment section, so please comment away with your interpretations because this is something that I'm still currently pondering. But was the Lina shown at the last shot of the film the real Lina? Some people have said that they believe that it's the alien Lina due to it focusing on her shimmery glare of her eye. But to me, this is too far-fetched considering we literally saw Lina set her duplicate on fire and we continue to see her alien duplicate perish in the flames. I believe that the Lina we see at the end of the film is the original Lina, and the reason why the film focuses on her shimmery glare is to convey that the extraterrestrial DNA that she contracted from the shimmer is still well within her, and that she came out of the shimmer a different person than she was before. So lastly, what is the significance of the snake tattoo and where did it come from? We see a victim earlier in the film that looks like something straight out of John Carpenter's The Thing, and we can also observe that he had the same snake tattoo on his arm. So this could indicate two things. The tattoo is either the mark of the shimmer or she contracted it from someone else through refracted DNA. I'm leaning more towards that she contracted it from refracted DNA, because the film goes well out of its way to explain exactly how the shimmer works. It states that it refracts all kinds of DNA despite what kind of species it is. It explains that the shimmer refracts all DNA regardless of species. So I think it would make more sense to say that she contracted the tattoo through recycled DNA from people who had entered the shimmer beforehand. Now the metaphorical relevance is actually quite fascinating to me. The symbol of a snake eating its own tail has had different meanings throughout its history, but its relevance to the film has to do with infinity, identity, and self-destruction. The snake eating itself is what resembles self-destruction, and I've already explained the thematic relevance of self-destruction in this film. Self-destruction and chaos are necessary components for life to exist and emerge. Planets can only exist with the existence of stars because they form within the stardust of a newly born star. But newly born stars can only exist if previous stars eventually explode and self-destruct. So I believe what the writer and director Alex Garland was going for is that chaos and self-destruction is a natural yearning that every human being has because, again, without these components, life cannot be possible. Self-destruction and chaos comes first and order follows it as a natural consequence. I also believe it has a lot to say about identity. The film is attempting to flip our conventional perspective regarding identity. For instance, the mutated bear that contracts Shepard's DNA, what is the identity of that bear? We can hear Shepard's morbidly disturbing screams come from the bear, so what is it? How do we define what that is? I believe it's trying to say that identity is more or less an illusion that we get too caught up with and we fail to realize that we are all one and are made up of DNA just like every life form on this planet. This also goes hand in hand with the concept of infinity. When we die, we don't really die. The illusion of our identity might die, but cells across the planet and universe are still thriving and dividing after we die, therefore we continue to live on. But alright, that's about all I got for you guys. Again, one of the reasons why I really appreciate this film is due to its ability to provoke ample amounts of discussion. It really gets people's minds running. So please share all of your thoughts and interpretations in the comment section because I'd love to join the discussion and see what everybody has to say about Annihilation. Thank you so much for clicking on this video and hearing what I had to say about Annihilation. If you really enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and share it amongst your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the Misfit channel to be updated on more film-related content.